This week on The Destination Angler. Gilly, you said earlier that on some of the beats that you can only cast upstream. What are some of the rules?
Oh God, no! On all of the beats,
All of the you can only cast upstream. So what if I do a cast downstream? Do they come out and shoestring tackle me as I'm trying to escape? Like what happens?
Yeah, they do. You get taken to the Tower of London. That's it. We never see you again.
That was Gilly Bate on the River Test. Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haig. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome back to another episode of The Destination Angler, brought to you by Anglers Coffee, perfecting the coffee experience for the fly fishing community and anglers everywhere with small batch coffee delivered to your doorstep. It's darn near perfect. And by Got Fishing, crafting world-class fly fishing adventures, specially designed to your level of experience and budget. By Trout Routes, the #1 fishing app, helping you find new trout waters so you spend less time on the road and more time doing what you love, trout fishing. And by Adams Built Fishing Gear, the trusted source for quality fly fishing gear built to last at an affordable price. Up next on The Destination Angler, Colorado and our first ever carp fishing episode. Then we head to Steelhead Alley in Northeast Ohio for an epic steelhead episode. And be sure to backcast to catch the last episode on the Little Judiana River in central Pennsylvania with competition angler Josh Miller, who gives a masterclass on Euro nymphing. You won't want to miss these shows. Hey, if you like the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button and please tell a buddy. Want to be the first to know about new episodes? Well, head on over to the Destination Angler podcast website and become a subscriber. You'll be entered to win a full year subscription to Trout Routes Pro and a 3-month subscription to Anglers Coffee. Man, you can't beat that. We'll select a winner on the next episode. And speaking of winners, Doug from Tampa, Florida is our lucky winner this week. Congrats, Doug, and thanks for listening. Coming in December, be sure to check out the new Destination Angler Adventures podcast, the podcast about life and fly fishing from anglers like you. Got an epic story you want to share? Well, hit me up on Instagram or email. And today, our destination is the legendary River Test in the south of England. And my guest is expert guide and fly fishing agent Gilly Bate, owner of Fly Odyssey UK. If you've ever wondered what fly fishing in the UK is all about, then this episode is for you. Steeped in history, the River Test is considered by many the birthplace of fly fishing and one of the pre-eminent chalk streams in the world. Here, anglers can immerse themselves in a bygone era, fishing famous beats throughout private estates while testing their skill against surprisingly large and wily trout. Gilly has been fly fishing and guiding English chalk streams for 25 years and has appeared on TV shows, podcasts, and magazine articles. She is proud to be the first woman to present at the prestigious Fly Fishers Club in London. More about that later. And today, Gilly takes us into the world of estate fly fishing, river keepers, and proper English stream etiquette. Also, the grayling season and where to go for 3 to 5 pound class trout. As a bonus, we touch on Scotland and the iconic River Spey. And stick around to the end for some English shore lunch ideas. All right, let's hear from Gilly. Well, Gilly, welcome to the show.
Oh, hi, Steve. Thank you for having me on.
Good to have you all the way from across the pond here. We are so excited, and I'm sure my listeners are too, to hear all about English chalk stream fishing and some of your adventures and whatnot. But, okay, my first question for you is, what the heck is a fishing agent? That's a new term for us over here.
Okay, so I don't quite know how the fishing works out with you guys, because I think you have a lot of free fishing where people can just go fish. But here, pretty much all the fishing around the UK, particularly on the chalk streams, is very much all privately owned. It might be 800 yards, it might be 9 miles, but it's all privately owned. So a lot of the owners are busy people, and so they get a fishing agent to come in and let their fishing out to fishermen. And as a fishing agent, you might just be letting out a beat for a day for maybe 1 guy, 2 guys, 12 guys, or you might be also arranging equipment loan, guides to come and help them, and catering. They have, big posh picnics. So I kind of do it all really.
All right, so you're selling fishing streams. You're selling water for a day to a
I'm
group of
selling
fishermen.
fishing.
Then
Yeah,
selling
exactly.
fishing. There we go. All right, and I got to ask you this story about the Fly Fishers Club president. That thing was what founded in 1880 something, and you got a chance, the first woman to present there. What
Yeah,
was that like?
it was. I mean, it's amazing. So I almost felt like I was going to meet the Queen. If you can imagine, sort of ornate halls and gilt, framed oil paintings from the 1700s or something,
Yeah.
all covered in gilt, and everybody, all the guys are dressed in kind of very formally dressed. And I'm going to be frank, it was quite terrifying because it's very much, even to this day, a gentleman's only club. And
Oh
my
man.
husband has become a member, but I cannot go there unless I go with him, and only to certain events where they allow women in.
Okay.
But it is amazing the history. They've got lots of historical, first edition copies of books and original fly dressings. I think they've got, I can't remember which president it was, but going back a long time, they've got his hand-tied flies.
One of our presidents?
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
okay.
And I feel really embarrassed I can't remember, but it's beautiful, and they arrange, it was a great honor to do it, but I was very nervous
Is
speaking
that
in
right?
front of all these lords and, all these kind of people. But it was, it was a great thing to have done. It was very exciting and a great honor that they wanted to meet me at all. So
For sure.
I think they were just shocked I was doing what I was doing, really.
Is that right? Nothing like shocking a bunch of stodgy old men.
No, they're really nice guys,
Are they
and
good?
they love their fly fishing, and that's the thing. I think for all of us, it's a passionate sport, isn't it?
Yeah, it gets in your blood.
We're all emotive about our fishing. It kind of gets inside you, and you just want to learn as much as you can and spread that to other people, but also something to treasure really as well, and look after it hopefully for future generations. It's a great thing.
Yeah.
But it's still a lot of men still go fishing. I think in America it seems to be more of a family thing, fishing. Is that right?
Uh, I don't know. It probably depends. I mean, I see mostly men on the water. There are female
Okay.
fishing guides out there. I've been trying to get more and more of them on the show. I'm talking to several of them today. I just had a lady who runs the only fully staffed by women guide company in the North America. She did a show on an area in
Wow,
Colorado.
that's
So
amazing.
yeah, but we'd love to see more women out there. And you're right. A lot of our fishing is you don't have to pay. You can just go out to these public, beautiful areas in the U.S., particularly out west, and go fishing. But I'm curious, what do the Brits think of American fishing? Like, what comes to mind there?
I think, well, of course, everybody instantly talks about a river runs through it, don't they? That's
Of
always the
course.
first big conversation. But it is that. I think I've got friends who've been out to Montana and fished, and they said it is the freedom and the beauty and the wildness of it all, and being able to go wherever you can get to, really. So I think yeah, I mean, and then you must know Simon Goldsworthy. I'm sure you've heard of, from who does all the Rio products, and he's a great instructor from the UK who's
Ah,
now moved over to America, and he's teaching is at the Far Bank. He's doing all sorts of stuff on YouTube, but he's also going around America and teaching spey casting and
there you
just
go.
changing people. Yeah, so I think it's a small world, isn't it? Really.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And I'm hear more about the friendships you've made through fly fishing. I'm sure there are many. But first, could you kind of give us the lowdown on fishing in the UK? Like what I've heard a few things is like there's tons of famous rivers, right? The River Spey, the Test that we're going to talk about today, and many others. But I've also read that it's cheaper and more wild the farther north you go. So give us kind of an overview if you could.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So basically, I'm based down in southern England, right down the bottom end of it, and that's we've got Hampshire and Berkshire and Wiltshire. These are all counties, and that's where the majority of our chalk streams are. Worldwide, that's where the chalk streams are. And I'll talk about that maybe later, but that's a specific type of water. But you are quite right. We've got fishing all over the country. We've got good fishing in Wales, really good fishing in Wales. And then as you travel up through the country, as you go up sort of 3/4 of the way up, they've got fantastic fishing, sort of Yorkshire, Cumbria, all that area. There's a couple of other quite well-known chalk streams actually up in Yorkshire. And then, of course, you head up to Scotland and you've got the very famous salmon rivers. So you've got the Tay and the Spey and the Tweed and the River Dee. But yeah, so there, and I've been very fortunate. We've been going to the Spey for 25 years, and it's completely different. The salmon fishing is expensive, and it's all very much, again, like the River Test. It's, people that have been fishing for years and years. So until somebody stops or dies, they basically, it gets offered to the same people time and time again. So getting on those better beats or more productive beats is quite difficult. But you never know. You get people that go somewhere, it's cost them £20 for a day and they'll catch salmon. It's just knowing where to go and who you know, like a lot of these things. And then, and the fishing, you are quite right, though. So up in Yorkshire, they've got lovely rivers like the River Eden, the Annan, even the River Clyde outside of Glasgow has got really good trout fishing, big wild trout now. And that, you can become a member for, I don't know, £50 a year. You can get a day's fishing for £10.
Oh,
I mean, that's incredible. That's for trout fishing, not for salmon, but for trout fishing. Right. Whereas you come down here, they are freestone rivers. It's a different type of river that the rain falls and comes down a stream and then rushes out to sea. Whereas down here, we have totally different type of water. The chalk streams, the water falls from the sky, goes through the chalk, gets dissolved, minerals become dissolved, and then it all gets stored in an underground aquifers, great big reservoirs. And then that water is slowly released through bournes, which then brings it back up to the river. So the reason why it's so extraordinary is that I could have, 4 days of proper rain, and the chalk stream, I will go to the test, and it might only have lifted an inch, couple of inches, and it's still running crystal clear.
Yeah.
But if you go up to Cumbria or Yorkshire, further up north, and Wales, those rivers, when it rains, that's it. You're blown off for maybe, you can be blown off for a week because the rivers, they flood and they become unfishable and they turn into, the color of coffee.
Yeah, muddy.
So that's why people want to come down and fish on the chalk streams. It's that clarity of water. But it's not to say that we haven't got great fishing around the country. And I think particularly if you're after your wild browns, big wild browns, I think the fishing, particularly up in the Cumbria area and in bits of Scotland, is exceptional. It's really good fishing. But you have got those problems where, and again, you've not got the quantity of fish, but you've got some really good fish. You'll catch probably lots of little ones the size of your hand. But if you're after bigger fish, you've got to know where to go, how to fish for them. And so it's very varied, but we got plenty of water. I mean, the UK is a tiny island, so we're lucky, and we get a lot of rain. So we got plenty of rivers.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And the River Spey, so this is Spey as in spey casting? It came from that river?
It certainly did. And it's so funny when I started sort of teaching fly casting and becoming an instructor, and because of the type of fishing I do, my riverbanks on the Test and the Itchen down here, it's all manicured, it's all kept very tidily. So there are river keepers who cut all the grass. We've got margins along the riverbank for fly lights. So, but basically you could fish it in, your slippers. So what I mean is they cut down trees and they manage it. So it's easy for people to overhead cast. And also on the chalk streams, we have this rule where we only cast upstream. We can nymph or we can dry fly, depending on times of year with the nymphing, but it's always casting upstream to a fish. So the necessity to be spey casting, you don't need. Salmon fishing, complete opposite. You're casting, across and the fly is going down, and you're catching fish on as
Right.
it swings round or it's on the dangle. So so the spey casting is absolutely essential, because it's all it means is change of direction. And there are lots of different spey casts, as I'm sure you know, but it's it's a great thing to learn. And I use with my single-handed rod. I spey cast quite often. Quite often. I don't always need to, but it's so handy to be able to learn
Yeah,
how
if you
to,
know how to do it.
move that fly and that line to wherever you want it when you suddenly see a fish.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
just helps you to get a fly where you want it. So it's a great thing to learn.
Now, Gilly, you were telling me for the show that you've done really well on the River Spey, right? Like, can you tell us about one of your? I think you caught a really nice one this year, didn't you? Or was it last year? I can't remember.
I did. I was really, last year. I didn't catch one last year. I blanked last year, which was we take a week, just a week every year. Sometimes we might be lucky and go up for another 3 days or maybe another week. And my husband's mad keen on salmon. I don't really get the chance to go up, but we always have a week, and we have done for about the last 25 years. We've been lucky to go to the same place. And it's a beautiful, beautiful bit of the River Spey. It's a productive bit. Numbers aren't, sadly, I'm sure, like in America, the salmon numbers are declining here for a variety of reasons. But it's a good beat, and we quite often catch. But it is kind of like catching a unicorn. You have to kind of have faith and hope.
That they'll open their mouth and chew something.
Yeah, you've got to enjoy your casting. But this year was lovely. It was the very first day, so Monday morning, and I was with one of the gillies who originally had been a spey casting champion in his younger days. He's still young. He's only about 34, I think, but amazing caster. And I had a new rod. I had a little short guideline new rod. And so we were just messing around. He was showing me some underhand casting, and we're playing around with casts. And it was just before lunch, and the fly was on the dangle, and we were chatting. And suddenly my line started to go, and I looked at him and I said, "Is that a fish?" And he went, "Well, yes." And I said, "Shall I lift the rod?" He was like, "Well, yes, yes."
Oh,
I
that's
was
great.
you. So I then lifted the rod, and I think it was just a bit shy of 13-pound, nice silver fish. So, and when you see one, I just think they're extraordinary creatures. My heart leaps when I see a salmon.
You're talking about Atlantic salmon, then?
Atlantic salmon, and you get those. Sometimes we've been fortunate when we have been up there kind of May time, when you get the springers, the big springers coming up, and they are bright silver with sea lice, and they're just I think there's nothing like them. I think they're extraordinary creatures,
and they fight well too, don't they?
Well, they certainly do. I mean, down. I'm sure maybe you've done lake fishing, but we have some lakes around where I live in Hampshire, quite famous lakes if you're into your lake fishing, and they deliberately stock. People come to catch these massive rainbows that are double figures, up to 20 pounds or whatever, and you catch a salmon that's 12 pounds, and I've caught plenty of trout at 12 pounds, and they give you a fight, but a salmon, it's a different world, and you're fishing a big rod and pulling on it. They're just, and they're in a big bit of river. The Spey's a mighty river, and I think there's nothing like it. It's heaven,
awesome.
Heaven sent, and beautiful scenery. Just wild and amazing. So I don't teach salmon fishing, but it's my downtime. It's just awesome. I'd do more of it if I could. I love it.
Hey anglers, you've heard me talking about Angler's Coffee for quite some time now, and I have a question for you. Have you tasted it yet? Well, if you have, then you know what I'm talking about. It's darn good coffee, isn't it? Hey, if you're like me, tasting's believing, and believe me, this coffee tastes great. My wife and I are hooked on it. Angler's Coffee offers an impressive spectrum of flavor profiles, so there's something for everyone. When you're spending a day on the water, you need a great cup of coffee to carry you through, like the Coachman's Blend. Named after the famous Royal Coachman, you'll love the design of the bag as much as the coffee. This blend of medium and dark roasted coffee from Central and South America produces a flavorful and smooth cup with notes of chocolate and baking spices and a smooth finish. Order some today and save 10% with a custom subscription like I did. You pick the coffee blends you want, and they're delivered right to your doorstep. And if you're not 100% satisfied, they'll give you your money back, no questions asked. No kidding. A percentage of each sale goes to some great nonprofit organizations in the fly fishing community. So put a smile on your face, just like I did, and give it a cast. That's Angler's Coffee. Tasting's believing. With so much information out there, it can get downright confusing and even overwhelming to find the right fishing adventure. Sorting through all the options and fees can be quite the headache. Well, not anymore. I'm super excited to introduce Got Fishing. Got Fishing is a boutique booking agency for world-class fishing adventures around the world. They ensure that you are on the exact fishing trip that meets your skill level, budget, and desired experience. Whether you're a seasoned angler or new to the sport, Got Fishing's personalized service will help you decide which adventure is the best fit for you, your group, or even your business. Worry about fees? Worry no more. With Got Fishing, you won't pay anything extra because their services are entirely free for you. You see, Got Fishing exclusively partners with highly reputable outfitters who gladly compensate them for their services, ensuring a win-win situation. Explore the range of fishing adventures and learn more about the services Got Fishing provides at gotfishing.com. That's www.gotfishing.com. And check them out on Instagram too. So when I got right out of college, I got a chance to go travel in Europe, and I was in Scotland. Our ancestral home is on the Tweed River. And there's a Hague.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a Hague castle there. I went and knocked on the door, and the lady answered the door, and I started to tell her who I was, and I got about halfway through, I'm a Hague from America, and she's like, "Oh, you Hagues, think you can just come barging into my house?" I was like, "Okay, sorry."
Oh.
But the guy called her husband, who was the Lord or the Baron, whatever you call him. He called me. He found me that night in a little town, in a hotel, and he invited me over for
Wow.
a pint of beer, which I thought was pretty cool. But when I was up there, I somehow got a hold of a fishing rod, and I just started fishing in a river, having no idea that, I don't know, could I have been arrested? I mean, I'm sure it was private water. I caught a bunch of trout. And I thought, oh, this is great.
I think you could have got into a lot of trouble.
I figured. But
did you catch a fish?
Oh yeah, I caught a lot of trout. Yeah, and they kind of look like brook trout. I'm assuming you got brook trout over there, but I don't know.
No, it'd be little brown trout.
Maybe a little brown.
Little brown trout,
I was 22 years old, so anyway. But ignorance is
how
bliss.
Amazing! That's a great story. I love it.
Somebody did stop in the car and kind of said, "Hey, buddy, I don't know if you should be fishing there." And I was like, "Really? Why?" So anyway, enough about me.
I guess if you don't know, yeah, it's a shame, really. I think people do. I think in Scotland, actually, brown trout fishing, you are allowed. They have different rules. They've got no trespass laws in Scotland, so I think technically you can actually go and fish for brown trout. But the problem is, if you end up with a lot of trout anglers on a river which is being sold for salmon fishing, it just doesn't really work. So it's a tricky one. There's plenty. To be honest, there's plenty of rivers up there where you can just go trout fishing. So it's tricky. It's tricky because everybody just wants to go and salmon fishing is expensive, particularly on somewhere like the Tweed.
All right, so fill me in on the history of chalk. First of all, chalk streams are rare. Like you said, most of them are in southern England, right? But so they're rare, and they produce great trout streams.
If you think of the world, in southern England, well, we've got 85% of the world's chalk streams just in the UK. We've then got, there's a couple in northern France, and then the rest are kind of out in New Zealand. So they are really special. They are really special. And it is the clarity. It is like looking into, sometimes you look at a trout in a bit of chalk stream, and sometimes it looks like it's floating because it doesn't look like there's any water. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Yeah, clean. Absolutely.
It's kind of quite weird. The upper test, so we've got like the upper test, the middle test, and then the lower test. And it does slightly change. Obviously, as it comes down, it's 40 miles source to sea, but the river is divided up, which was done, I don't know how long ago, a century ago, 2 centuries ago, when they used to have mills. They used the water for cleaning paper. They used to use it to clean the paper for the banknotes of England, for washing wool. They used to clean it for washing wool. And then also, before the fishing really became a thing of money for the estates and income for the estates, they used to keep animals down on the by the river. And what they would do in the winter was they would flood all the pasture land, and it would keep the chalk streams are a constant temperature between 10 and 12, slightly changing now with global warming in the heat of the summer, but generally, even in the winter, very, very cold day with snow on the ground.
And that's like 50 degrees, I think, Fahrenheit.
10 and 12, yeah. And so what they used to do is they used to flood the kind of meadows. And what it did was, because it was still warm, the water, in comparison with the air, it actually kept the young grass. It didn't kill it off. And then the water is slightly alkaline, and it's got all these lovely dissolved nutrients. So when they then closed all the weirs and got all the water back into the main river or carriers, basically you got really good growth and lush pasture for the cows. So that's why we have got series of weirs and actually and what we call carriers. And so although it's 40 miles from source to sea, we've actually got 80 miles of fishing. So you might book a day on the river test, and sometimes it will be what you would call the main river, but very often it's a carrier, but it's still the test. You're still booking the river test. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was looking on some maps, and it looks like a labyrinth of side channels, irrigation ditches, mill channels, tributaries. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, and that's a very good way to describe a labyrinth. You're absolutely right. And then you get sections where it kind of joins up and it's main again.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's extraordinary. Yesterday I was actually on the upper test, which is my favorite, but with a friend fishing, and we walked out, and it was like a picture book. It was everything that fishing should be. There were trout right up on the surface. There was grayling coming up. There was a good hatch going on, and fish feeding, taking dry flies, and it was just like we just sat and watched it for a while, going, "Wow,
cool.
This is what fishing's about." Just amazing.
Hey, anglers. If you've been listening to the podcast, you already know Trout Routes has mapped and classified over 50,000 trout streams covering the entire lower 48, including 350,000 hand-curated public access points marked and ready for you to explore. But I bet you didn't know about a brand new feature called Trout Lakes. With a flip of a filter, Trout Routes Pro users can see over 12,000 fishable alpine lakes in the lower 48. You can turn this layer on in the filters menu to open up a whole new set of trout fishing opportunities. There's nothing more exciting than finding that new trout stream, lake, or access point. I'm a huge fan of Trout Routes because they make it so easy. Say goodbye to stumbling around country roads looking for your next spot. Because Trout Routes provides every detail you need for each stream or lake, including public and private bridges, stream flows, trail access, where to park, camping opportunities, boat ramps, and a new feature to calculate actual river miles. How cool is that? No service, no problem. You can save maps for offline use. With Trout Routes, I've found dozens of new streams and access points I never would have known about. So what are you waiting for? Sign up for Trout Routes today on your Apple or Android phone. Are you an avid angler in search of top-notch fly fishing gear that's easy on the wallet? Well, look no further than Adams Built Fishing Gear. Adams Built is the ultimate choice for anglers who prioritize quality, affordability, and style. Established in 2014, Adams Built has been the trusted companion for thousands of anglers, creating unforgettable moments on the water. Seasoned pros and beginners alike will love their lineup of lightweight and durable waders and wading boots, high-quality nets and fly rod starter kits, and meticulously designed fly boxes and outerwear. When I first heard about Adams Built, I have to admit I was a bit skeptical. Having run through many pairs of waders over the years, I wondered about their guarantee. So get this, folks, all Adams Built branded products are guaranteed to last, and Adams Built waders carry a lifetime repair or replace guarantee. You only pay shipping. Hard to beat that. So why not make Adams Built Fishing Gear your go-to choice? Check them out at a dealer near you or at adamsbuiltfishing.com. That's Adam Built Fishing, the trusted source for quality fly fishing gear. Gilly, describe more of the scenery there. So I'm thinking these manicured lawns, but I look at pictures, there is some tall grass right next to the streams. But what's it look like?
Yeah, when I started guiding kind of 20 years ago, it was super manicured. But obviously, we know that the insect life is really important because that feeds the trout. So most of these states now have put in margins by the riverbank, and that might be, a couple of feet. I had one this summer that they'd allowed to grow up. I'm not very tall. I'm only 5 foot, and they'd actually allowed it to grow up. And I had to complain because I said, "Look, I'm out guiding. I can't see over the top of it. Please, can you just cut some sections so I can actually see what I'm doing?"
Under 5 feet,
so
please.
that wasn't very good. Yeah. So they are, and they're planting certain trees in certain spots. So it's not like a big open area. You get certain beats. So, for example, if I had somebody who might be, just an example, you might get somebody in their 80s who's a bit older, who doesn't really want to have to creep around and struggle through the undergrowth. There are certain estates or beats that you can book, which have made it a lot easier for your backcasting, and they've just made it a lot easier. There are certain states which have gone down the other route and tried to keep it a little bit more wilder and bit more real. But it is quintessentially English. I mean, there are certain spots with old thatched fishing huts, and it's just beautiful. Some places you go to, and I often, I love what I do, and I just think I'm so privileged to be looking at all of this. But I also, when I have a day off, I do like going somewhere where I've got to fight my way through all the bushes and, climb over logs and make it as I like that aspect of, struggling to catch a fish, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah. It sounds, domesticated is the word that comes to mind, but that's nice for some people, it sounds like.
I think it's what it is. I hear what you're saying, and it is. It's managed. It's very much managed.
Yeah,
so all the estates have river keepers who work incredibly hard at what they do.
Yeah, what's a river keeper? What is that?
So a river keeper, they normally live in a cottage that's attached to the estate, and they basically work. I don't know how they work so hard, because during the trout season, they literally will be on the riverbank from, they're out there at 8 o'clock in the morning, checking the fishing huts, making sure everything's clean. There's usually coffee and tea in a kettle now in all the fishing huts, making sure all the rubbish has been taken away from the fishermen the day before, making sure there's no rubbish like nylon or anybody's accidentally left anything where they shouldn't have. And they mow the grass so it's nice and easy for people to walk to. They cut down, anything that, so we have 3 times a year in June, July and August, we have to have what we call weed cut. And the reason being is because the water is rich in nutrients, we get overgrowth. It's like, I suppose it's like putting too much fertilizer on your garden.
Sure.
We get an amazing overgrowth, and what happens then is the vegetation in the water is what we need. We want big swaying things of ranunculus because that's where all the insects live, and so the trout feed on that. But we also need to be able to see the fish if we're going to try and catch them. So it's quite a job, and they, some of them still do it by hand. They go in with size, and they will cut a pattern in the weed, so you get like a circle. You'll get an area where you can see the trout, and the trout will hold in the water. So it's arduous work. It's I go out and I see them working, and I think, wow, it's hard work. It's really tiring. Some of the beats where the water is a lot deeper, you just can't get in to do that. So they do have weed cutting boats that chug up and down, and they slice all the weed up, which is kind of not so good. But it's better than having the river. If they left it, if nobody managed it, it would just choke up with weed. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it has to be managed. It's not just for the fishing. It has to be managed. And so we get to the end of Mayfly, halfway through June, and they close. Not all of the beats. You can, on some beats, you can buy a less expensive day fishing because you might have weed floating down. So it depends on the weed cut. Some years, so for example, last year, we had a very, very dry spring, and we rely on January, February to pour. We want lots of rain in January and February, and that fills the aquifer up, which then releases it throughout the year back into the river. And we had very little rain, so we had very, very low water, and which meant we didn't have the super growth. And also, when they do a weed cut, the weed holds the water. So when they do a weed cut and you go back after 10 days, the water height has dropped a lot. I mean, it's dropped right down. So the river keepers all know each other. They all talk to each other, and they manage how much they take out. This year, we had a lot of rain in the spring, which was great because it filled the aquifers back up. And we're back to good height of water. We then had in June, we had a heavy weed cut on those middle stretches. It's quite fun though, because if you go to watch, as you can imagine, all this weed floats down the river like a great big raft, and all the little nymphs and shrimps and all manner of stuff is falling out, and you see the fish going crazy. And we just had, the famous mayfly period just before then. So when you go back in June, when they reopen the river, the fish look like little barrels. They're all really fat.
Oh my gosh, that's perfect though.
Freezing.
Love that.
Yeah, so it's great fun. And then what they do is they don't let it wash out to sea. It gets about 3/4 of the way down the river, and then they have a kind of thing where it all gets caught up, and they have a big mechanical booms that lift the weed out. And,
no kidding.
And I don't know what they do with it after that, but they lift it out of the river rather than just let it go to sea. So it's quite a thing, but they have to do it, as I say, they have three, one in June, one in July, and one in August. And actually, it's quite nice because I don't know what the pressure is like on your river, but we've got a huge population in England, in Britain, who want to fish, and so the Test and the Itchen and a lot, the Avon, all these rivers, Berkshire and Wiltshire, huge pressure on the fish. So we have almost every day fishermen fishing the same bits of water, almost every day. But it's controlled number-wise, so it'll be 2 people on maybe 900 yards, half a mile, or whatever, fishing. So it's controlled.
As a fishing agent, do you say, "Well, I'm going to rest this stream for a day"? Does that come into play?
There are a few places, but very rare. A few places that might not have, they might not have a weekend fishing because the owners don't want it, because the owners want to go and fish themselves, or they just don't want people there at the weekend. As I say, most places close during week cut, but there are some estates that stay open because people want to fish and it's less expensive. So, but it does mean it's highly pressurized on the fish.
Interesting.
And the guides.
Yeah, I'll bet.
We get to weed cut and it's like, thank goodness it's weed cut time. We all need a rest. We're all, by the end of Mayfly, June, we're all hanging. We're all exhausted from being out. So
every day,
it's like the fish get a rest, we get a rest. The river keepers work really hard then, but it's a nice time. But it's income for all the estates, and it's management of the water. It's like any farming really. You could let it go all wild and overgrown and go back to nature, but it would just block up. It wouldn't be what it is if you just
so
if it didn't. So the fishing provides an income, which then provides the management. So it works. It works.
All right. So Gilly, you said earlier that on some of the beats that you can only cast upstream. What are some of the rules?
Oh God,
other
no,
rules?
On all of the beats.
All of the you can only cast upstream. So what if I do a cast downstream? Do they come out and shoestring tackle me as I'm trying to escape? Like what happens?
Yeah, they do. You get taken to the Tower of London. That's it. We never see you again. I can tell this story because she's become a very, very good friend and client. I have a lovely American lady who lives in London now. She's a working professional, and she took a day. First time she'd come down fishing at some lakes, had a lesson with me, and then she booked a day for 6 people, came down fishing on one of the most famous beats on the River Test. And at lunchtime, we had 3 guides working that day. So one of the other guides had been with her, and she came back and carrying these 2 huge fish. She was really, really happy. And I could see the guide's face behind me, not very happy. And I thought, oh, okay, just go and have lunch. So she went off to sit down to lunch. I said, okay, what's the problem? And she was using a fly. She now jokes about it, but she was using a fly called a red Francis. And your salmon fishermen will know what a red Francis is. And it's a big, great, big, huge red fly with 2 hooks on. And she was casting it downstream and stripping it through the water. And that is an absolute no-no. And I had to, after lunch, say, I'm really sorry, but you just can't do that. You cannot. And she then said, but, you know, we paid a lot of money to come and fish here, which I understand. And I said, the problem is,
we have rules.
It's not what it's about, the skill. And it was mayfly time. So mayfly is not always, but it should be one of our easiest times when you've got these massive, massive insects coming off and the fish going crazy for them. And the skill and the joy is casting a fly upstream to a rising fish. And on the test, with the clarity, it is really what it's about. I mean, yesterday we were watching these fish coming up and taking a fly, and it is about being able to present that fly to a fish above it and watch it come up and take it. If we cast like big heavy nymphs or, you know, the kind of flies we might use in lakes, if we cast those downstream and across and stripped it through the water, you catch a lot of fish. And nowadays, going back 20 years, and I started as a guide, most people would come and maybe take a couple of fish and they were happy. Now there's a big demand. There's a younger group coming in fishing and they want to catch a lot of fish. So we have rules to control that, because imagine I've got 6 anglers out. They all catch 15, 20 fish each and they let everyone go. The next day you get another group come in. They can't get near those fish, and they learn. The fish definitely learn that, you know. So all of the estates have got slightly different rules, but most of them, I would say, the majority allow an angler to take a brace, a couple of fish each, and then they can maybe catch another 4. You know.
Oh, and once I catch those, and then I'm done.
That's
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they're done.
Really?
Yeah, and it's hard if you're not used to that, if you don't understand that's how it works. There are some beats where you can kill 2 and then just keep catching all day long. But they are few and far between, the majority of places. But it's not that easy. You're not going to go there. I mean, you like any fishing, you get red letter days, don't you? You go out and the fish are taking, you know, go crazy. But, you know, it can be hard. Sometimes, even though you can see a lot of fish, it can be. And also, at the beginning of the year, they've wintered over, they've been breeding over the winter. So they don't eat much at all over the winter. And so you get into April, early May,
hungry.
They're crazy to start eating and they go mad. But as the season goes on, every single day they haven't seen anglers all winter, and suddenly there's anglers every day, people thrashing lines around, fish running around being caught. They soon get savvy. And you get into the summer months, the river height drops. When you cast out, you know, they feel that line. They're very aware you're casting at them. They're aware of, we're the biggest predator. You know, we've got otters that will take them. Occasionally we get the odd mink. We do get that. But it's the angler is their biggest predator. So they are looking out for us as much as we are looking for them. And the kind of, I do think on the chalk streams, the upstream rule is the right one. They have, on some beats, there are some beats where it is absolutely dry fly only. So if there's no if there's no fly coming off, it's going to be a really tough day. But those beats that tend to have that rule have usually got good insect life. Like everywhere around the world, sadly, the insect population isn't what it was. If I go back 20 years ago, it's not, you know, 20 years ago, I would, on a mayfly day, I literally could walk back to my car and I'd have mayfly on my head. There'd be mayfly on my windscreen. You know, now it's not as prolific. You see the odd day you get like that, but it's not as prolific as it was. So I think, and the nymphing, so nymphing generally on most beats isn't allowed until 1st of July. It's usually after the mayfly and after weed cut. And then they allow nymphing. There are a few beats that actually allow nymphing up all year, but it's always upstream. And the one thing you're not allowed to use on the test is two flies together. So you've heard of a New Zealand rig, where you have maybe like a big clink hammer at the end of your leader, and then you tie on a tippet with a little nymph underneath.
Dry dropper.
Yeah, it's a dropper. It's not allowed. Droppers, oh my God, no, you're not allowed to use two flies.
Really?
Not allowed to use two flies in the test until absolutely not. But interestingly, we have the grayling season, which starts kind of mid-October and goes through till Christmas. Not a lot of the beats close the entire winter, but we do have some that have got good grayling fishing, and the price drops dramatically for the grayling fishing. So it's a good way if you want to fish the test or the Itchen to do some grayling fishing, because it's a lot less money, and you're allowed to use the rig for that.
How do you target just grayling though?
Well, a lot of people ask me that, because what is really funny is at the moment, so we're now, the season finishes, some of the beats have already shut. They shut on the 30th September. We've got a few which are staying open till October the 14th, which is the end of our legal trout season in the UK, down in Hampshire. And already the trout are chasing each other and flashing up and down. You've got some of them which are feeding crazily because they know they're getting towards winter, but you can see it's getting towards that end of season. And what I find when I then go back maybe in 3 weeks time and we go out grayling November, December, and it's cold, it's like the trout have disappeared.
Oh, really?
and it's also like the grayling are like, oh, thank goodness those big trout have got out of our way and we can kind of hold court a little bit in the river. And it's just strange. They just kind of come to the fore. But also on a lot of these beats, the majority of beats we put in stocked fish. The fish are put in for you to catch. It's not all wild. In fact, there are very few beats which are truly wild, and even the stocked fish, they do move around up and down between the beats. And so obviously the stocking stops at the end of August, September, before the end of the season. So you don't have as many big trout in the river, and the wild trout are all off breeding. So they're not really as interested in your flies because they're off looking at each other, not at food.
Oh, it's interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it kind of works. I know I get a lot of people saying, oh, but don't you just catch trout all the time? And I think if you go very early grayling season, you do have a tendency to be catching trout. And it's really funny because it's actually quite annoying. Sometimes, I had a day last year, I went in January on a beat and I just kept catching like big trout. And it was like, oh, get off, I would have been in the past. I would have been delighted, but it's not what you're going for. You're going for the grayling, and they're a different kind of feeder. They feed in a different way.
Yeah, Gilly, what is a good fish on the test? Like size, pounds, whatever. What's a good fish?
Oh, I think that depends how you look at it. It's a really good question. Depends what you're looking for. So you've got to remember that the majority of the test is stocked fish. So people coming to fish the test, that's what they're and they see all the photos all over social media and in all the magazines. And so I think people are a good fish. People, if they catch a 5-pounder, they're really happy with that.
Yeah.
They're like, wow, that's a really cool fish. So 3 to 5 pounds, we have on some beats got even bigger. And that's kind of like maybe too big. They shouldn't really, I'm not going to go down that road because some people really like big fish and some people don't. For me, if I go fishing, we've got, there's a lovely, beautiful bit of water called the Wallet Brook, which feeds into the River Test. And it is completely wild fishing. And you go in there and there's tons and tons of little wild, beautiful, sparkling little wild. And then occasionally you see, the Bourne Rivulet. Did I say that? I said the Wallet Brook, didn't I? The Bourne Rivulet, which is quite famous. So the Bourne Rivulet. And that is, for me, if you get a fish, a 3-pound there, that's a hell of a fish. That's a really good fish.
That's a great fish anywhere, 3-pound. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good fish. But that's a wild fish. And they are they are, where you've got a lot of stocking, where the most popular beats are for most fishermen, there are wild fish, plenty of wild fish, but they kind of keep out the way, and they're harder to catch in a way. It's a difficult one to describe, because yesterday when we were out, we have got some stockfish where we were, but the wild fish are so keen to take flies that are hatching. They're much quicker than the stockies. And we could look up the river and you could see blip, 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 and it was the wild ones going crazy.
Ones.
And then the stockies started coming up and started taking them. But I suppose if you think about a wild fish, it's centuries of understanding it's going to eat when it's going to eat. Whereas a stockfish, for the first couple of years of its life, first year of its life, it's been fed with pellets.
Yeah.
So, but they do feed, and they're all reared on bits of the chalk stream. So they're used to the insect life. And when you catch one, a lot of people don't realize what they're catching. And they are beautiful fish. They're stunning.
And good size.
Brown.
I mean, I didn't realize there were big fish in there.
It just depends on where you go. So the middle test, where there's bigger, deeper water, we get bigger fish, obviously. And then when you go up upper test and divas and places like that, the fish are not quite so big. It just depends where you are. But if you go away from the chalk streams and let's go back up north now and go into Scotland with their rivers, and they've got wild brown trout and no stocking, you get some phenomenally big fish. 5-pounders, 4, 5, 6-pounders. But the only guys who catch those wild fish are really good fishermen. They are so tricky to catch. But they do catch them. And so, we've got a bit of everything in the UK, but the chalk streams, it's what they are. And the demand for fishing is so big. People come from all over the world because of the history of it. And so, that's why they have to supplement it.
That's kind of what you buy into.
Yeah.
Gilly, if you could give us a sense of what are, walk us through the seasons, sort of like how are you fishing for them in the early spring? Sounds like some good mayfly hatches. Then what changes as you go out, during the year? I'm assuming you have some terrestrials.
Yeah, it changes quite dramatically. So basically depending on where you are, the 1st of April or second or 3rd of April is like legally when you can start fishing. But just because of weather and tradition, a lot of the beats don't open up until the 1st of May. But in April, mid-April to the end of April, I think around April the 25th, we have this fly called the hawthorn fly. It's a terrestrial, so it doesn't hatch off the water; it hatches off the land. It's called the hawthorn fly because it comes out. It starts to hatch roughly the same time that the hawthorn comes into flower. And I think it's St. Mark's, what we call St. Mark's Day, which I think is either the 24th or 25th of April. And it's a big black fly with fuzzy, dangly legs. And it's just hopeless at flying. So any wind, it hatches kind of off the veg to any wind and it gets blown onto the river. And the fish go crazy for it. So if you're lucky enough to be on a river, I remember being on a bit of a river and walking down, and I thought, there's some hawthorn in front of me just dangling because they're rubbish at flying. And oh my God, I looked down the river and the entire river, it was boiling. I put on a hawthorn fly and I actually stopped fishing after an hour because they were just going crazy for it.
That's
so
awesome.
That can be a great fly early season. And then we have a very, very small caddisfly sedge called a granum. We get those. They're the first sedge of the year. Do you get those with you?
Well, the caddis, like granum caddis, yep.
Yeah, granum. So very, very small sedge. And they can be, so this year, the granum hatches were fantastic. And we had great fishing with the granum. And interestingly, the test has slightly changed over the years in that, like probably a lot of rivers in our UK, due to a lot of reasons, we now have more silt in the water. And mayfly larvae like their silt burrowers. So because we've got more silt, we have more mayfly. Now, if you go back to the 1930s when the guys used to whiz out of London to come down and fish on the Tez, they basically would come for the granum hatch. The granum hatch was a big thing. They'd pour out of London to come fishing, whereas the actual mayfly wasn't such a big deal. Whereas now the mayfly is a big deal. So Granham are really good. And then, and yeah, and we at that time of year, if the weather's cold, we'll still have what we call a large dark olive, which is the second sort of biggest fly on the chalk streams after the mayfly are really big, or danica are big flies. But the large dark olives, we still get early April, mid-April, you'll see them around, and they look like they're an upwing fly, look like your mayflies. I think in America you call your olives mayflies. Do you?
Yeah. Blue-wing olives, yeah.
Yeah, so basically, it's a general term, but the large dark olive floats down. It looks like a little sailing ship, and again, the trout will go crazy for that. So that's a very good fly to have at that time of year. We then get into the mayfly, and the trout are quite funny on the mayfly. So obviously, to begin with, they're going crazy because the nymphs have got really big and they're quite active. So you'll see the trout down on the bottom just nabbing these big mayfly nymphs. Huh. They then start to emerge up through the water column, and to begin with, the fish will be bulging under just at the surface because they're grabbing the emerging mayfly before they can get to the surface. Because it's always easier to get something before it's up there. And when the duns start hatching off, that when they first, it's usually about 16th of May, they start coming off. It's kind of like the fish are a bit nervous of them. They're really big. You know, sometimes you see they miss them because it's a big mouthful for them to get a hold of. And then they get onto them, and then they go crazy for them. And if you're lucky and you hit it right, it's you could cast out a tea bag and you catch a fish. They go that crazy for them. And it's if you get that. And this year we were sad. This year we had a very cold front came in May with an northeasterly wind, and the mayfly, we weren't seeing them during the day. They normally hatch off from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it just wasn't really happening. But what we were seeing was really good spinnerfuls at 9 in the evening.
Yeah.
And we kind of couldn't figure out so when were they hatching off? And the river keepers reckoned they were actually at night, the wind drops, actually gets a bit warmer, good cloud cover. And they think that the duns were actually hatching off at night. And that's why we weren't because the spinnerful, if you stayed till 9 o'clock in the evening, was unbelievable. So it's just interesting how these creatures kind of adapt. Right. But yeah, so basically we get into the mayfly, and then they get really fussy on pattern because it's almost like they gorge themselves on the duns. And then they start then they stop looking at dun patterns. They literally turn off them. It's quite interesting. And I guess they've seen a lot of fishermen thrashing flies around, and they start to turn off those flies. And then you've got to start using spinner and spent patterns. And they can be really particular. I mean, I've got a lot of mayfly patterns, and all the guides, we've all got our favorite kind of ones that we like. But it is interesting how they get really fussy. And then then the mayfly vanish. They literally just disappear. And they then go and the fish are all quite fat, and then they suddenly turn off. And even sometimes at the end of that mayfly period, it's almost like they've eaten too much fillet steak, you know. And it's like, oof, we've had enough. And they suddenly start. You can't believe they go from something so big, and they'll suddenly start taking something really small. And also in mayfly time, if you get it, because the weather's normally quite good in England at that time of year, but sometimes you get a cold front will come in, you get maybe some rain, a bit of wind, and we get something called an iron blue, so a mayfly pattern is about an 8 or a 10, and an iron blue is like a 16, and they will choose. I have been out thinking, God, there's mayfly coming off, and these fish are feeding, and they're not taking my patterns. Like, what's going on? And you look, and you suddenly realize they're actually taking iron blues. They're choosing to take the much smaller insect. So you've got to always be thinking they're not always taking what you think they're taking. You've got to always be looking. Observation is everything.
Okay.
So that's kind of a rough idea. And then we have kind of weed cut. And then we start getting blue-winged olives, are really good in June. Blue-winged olives, and even this week we've seen blue-winged olives coming off. They're a lovely, great fly.
Oh, wonderful!
And then we get we get medium-sized olives, we get small olives, and as the summer goes on, as a general rule, as the summer goes on, the olive pattern, so if you think of starting with our large dark olive, which is a 14, the mayfly, which is like an 8 or 10, by the end of the summer, we're down to 18s, 20s, 22s. We're using really, really tiny flies. And interestingly, the sedges, or your caddis, are the complete opposite. So the caddis at the beginning of the year are the granum, which are, they're not very big flies, are they? They may be 14, 16s. But once you get to now, some of the sedges coming off, we've got great big silvery grey sedges, which are about a size 8. I mean, they're really big. And big cinnamon sedges are 10, 12. So as a general rule, the sedges get bigger, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So you've got to be, the main thing is observation. Like, I think it must be the same. It's the same everywhere, isn't it? As you get out the car, as I'm walking through the river, I'm looking for cobwebs. I'm looking to see how the fish are rising. What are they doing? Are they just bulging at the surface? Are they taking emerges? Are they coming up and taking duns? Is it later and they're just sipping dead flies?
Yeah.
Are they taking the spent later on? Are they grabbing? Are they smashing and grabbing sedges which are about to take off? So and also in the summer months, one of the best days I had was a couple of years ago, and it was 30 degrees. It was a seriously, seriously hot day, and bright sunshine, and turned up. And I thought, oh, God, it's not going to be a hopeless fishing day.
Yeah.
And I could see all the way up the river, the fish were going crazy. Like, what? So I got my pack out, and I went to get out my fly box, and sitting on top of my pack was a flying ant. And all the flying ants in the UK hatch on the same day. Yeah. Which it sounds like an apocryphal story, but apparently they do. So anyway, I thought, oh, great. So I put on an ant pattern, and literally in an hour, I had to stop fishing. I mean, you couldn't go wrong. And then you've got, thinking like damselflies. Sometimes they'll take those, sometimes they won't. They'll take beetles are really, when I started out 20 years ago, it was quite traditional, and the patterns I was using, were flies that had been tied sort of in the late sort of 19th century. They were, just different, very, very traditional patterns that have been kind of laid down in law that we'd all been using. And now we're using a lot of CDC and a lot of emerger patterns, but also things like, back in the day, if I'd said to a client, put on a beetle or an ant or an aphid, they would have looked at me as if I was mad. People were not using, whereas now we're kind of like, well, they're taking hoverflies, little fake wasps, or, somebody the other day bought some, we had one of the beats we were on, we were struggling to catch, and we noticed in the grass there was crickets. Do you know what I mean? Grasshoppers.
Yeah.
Little tiny grasshoppers bouncing all over the place. And one of the guides had seen a grasshopper jump into the water, and a fish had nabbed it. So we started using hopper patterns, and we started catching that afternoon. So it just changes. And I think it's quite hard. So I get a lot of emails, inquiries from my guys going out fishing if they haven't got a guide, and it is what is happening on the water. So as I'm getting older, I'm trying to kind of cut back on my guiding a little bit. But I have to know what's going on. If you're not on the water, and it changes so much. And I think understanding the patterns and the fact that they will take really, really small things, and observing what the fish is doing. And also the river at the beginning of the year can be running quite fast, and it's high, and the fish haven't seen many anglers. So, you will get away with using a 5-weight rod and a 9-foot leader. That's absolutely fine early season. And also you're turning over those big mayfly patterns. You want a 6-pound leader. You want something that's going to turn it over and present that fly to that fish. But as you go through the summer, and these little olive upwings, they're getting smaller and smaller, they're 18s and things. And these fish are super spooky, and you would weed cut, so the river height's dropped, it's settled down, the flow is a lot less. They feel that line hit the water. So you're dropping down to 4 weights or 3 weights. And the biggest thing is getting my anglers, it's been so traditional in the test for every angler just to stick with a 9-foot leader, and it's just hopeless. So, I sometimes I just don't tell people now. I just put a 12-foot leader on and say, go and cast at that fish, and they're like, wow, look at that presentation. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
because your leader's longer, it's turning over now.
You go down to 5 and 6X, or do you measure it in
Yeah,
pounds?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, I do it both ways, but I think it's a fine thing because what you really want with those little flies is, like anywhere, drag is the enemy. And if you have too thick a leader on a fly, it will just drag immediately. Yeah. But the problem, it's a fine balance because some of the beats hold big fish. And so what you don't want is that fly getting bust off.
Yeah.
So it just depends. It's you got to make that call on that day and figure out how good is that fisherman. If you've got a fisherman who's really good, knows what he's doing, he's good at fishing, then that's fine. You can put a long 14, 15-foot leader on, go down to 6X, and that even if you've got good tippet material, he'll get that fish in. But with a lot of people, some people, it's a special thing. They'll have one day, they come for one day. And so, they've saved up to do that one special day. So you've got to try and get those guys a fish. So you have to, it's just the balance on what's happening at the time.
Yeah.
Can you alter what you're doing?
Sure.
But yeah, so you've got to be looking, you've got to be changing everything. And I think it's helping fishermen to understand you cannot just have a 5-weight rod and a 9-foot leader. And also, you've also got to be careful because people then go, oh, okay, so I'm going to get a 10-foot 3-weight, lovely, a longer rod. I love longer rods. I'm really into using a 10-foot rod as long as it's, as long as I'm not in somewhere where it's all enclosed and it's too long. But for most of it, I love a longer rod. You can present a mend and a reach cast. You can manage lines, manipulate lines so much better. And also you can get over things. It's just so much easier for getting a bit more distance as well. But if you go down, some people, oh yeah, I'm out with a 3-weight, and they're on a beat where I know there are really big fish and it's got really hot. It's 30 degrees. And basically you've got less oxygen in that water. And these people are taking ages to bring them in because you can't bring them in quickly because it's going to bust you off. And by the time I've seen it, you get a fish in, put it in the net. Yeah, we're going to do catch and release. And that fish is exhausted. You may as well just kill it. So I think it's, first of all, with the guy, like, do you want to kill the fish or are we going to catch it? Just say that as a guide, you've got to be clued up to all those things and how you're managing that day.
Gilly, I would have such trouble killing a 3 to 5 pound trout. I mean, are there people who are keeping those things? I would have a hard time killing something that nice. But I guess you have to.
No, if you think about the fact that it's start with there's one estate that I go to, and you have to kill your fish. You are not allowed to, unless it's wild fish and grayling are allowed to go back, but any stock fish you have to kill.
You have to kill it.
Now
okay.
That is actually but if you think about it, you've taken those fish away, so that means you've not got a fish in there which has been pricked. And so in a way, it manages the river better because if you get a lot of fish that get caught time and time again, they get fed up. But you've also got to remember these big fish, these 4 pound, 5 pound, these are not wild. They've been put in for the fishermen to catch. So I have no problem with them killing a stock fish. If they caught a wild fish, because you can tell the difference. If they caught a wild fish, a 3 pound, 4 pound, I would say please let it go, because a big fish, wild fish, is a better breeding fish. It's got great genes, And I think if you travel further up the country, go to Wales, and you again going back up middle, we've got the Derbyshire Wye where they've got wild rainbows. And traveling up the country, most people are letting those fish go because these are wild stocks and we want to maintain those wild stocks. And they've not got quite the pressure that the river test and the Itchen and the wily and the Avon and a lot of these beats have down here. It's a different kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think, I hear exactly what you're saying. And personally on the test, I don't keep anything unless I'm not. There's one particular state when I have to kill fish, but I then don't look for the stockies. I go and try and find a wild fish that I can cast at.
Go find the wild fish. So, Gilly, I would love to hear how you got into this because you said your husband's a farmer. So, assume you guys live out on a farm somewhere. And here you are having this beautiful life on the River Test, fishing every day. How did you get into this? How'd that happen?
Well, I didn't like fishing at all, to be quite honest. I grew up in Scotland, so I'd seen a lot of people fishing,
Ah,
but
okay.
I'd never tried fishing. And then I moved down south, married my husband, and he's fished since he was 9. And right next to where we live, we have some lakes. And from a 9-year-old boy, he used to go down and help down there on the lakes. And he then progressed from the lakes to fishing on the rivers, the Test and the Itchen. And we've got a local river here, the River Rother. He used to go down there as a young guy, 12, 13-year-old, and he'd catch all sorts of fish, not just trout. He'd catch all sorts of different types of fish. So he's always loved it. So when I met him, before we got married, we would go fishing and I would read a book and think it was really boring. And then we had 2 sons, and they kind of wanted to go fishing, and we dug on the farm. We dug a little kind of pond out, and he used to put some rainbows in there for the boys to go down and kind of catch some fish and play. And we used to get down to the lakes, it's a private syndicate, but he was a member, and we used to take the boys down there with their grandfather. So his father fished, and I guess he was busy. He was always busy in the summer, so I ended up with the boys catching the odd fish. And it was like, this is quite fun. And then we were very lucky. A very good friend invited us to Scotland. And I then kind of got the fact it wasn't just about catching a fish. It was about so much more. It was about being with friends. It was about watching everything. It was about so much more. And my children did children's courses, like fishing courses for kids.
Yeah.
And it was fly fishing. And I, being the kind of mother I was, used to go along and take a cake and put the kettle on and help these guys, instructors. And I'd meet these casting instructors and I'd watch them cast, and I go, my God, that's amazing. How do you get that?
You were interested.
How do you?
Yeah.
So yeah, they started helping me, and so I started really getting into it, thinking this is great fun. And people started asking me if I could kind of teach their wife or daughter, and I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I caught quite a few fish, and I'd been on the river a bit with my father-in-law, and caught my first fish on a dry fly on the River Nadder down in Wiltshire. And I just thought, God, this is just so cool. And so I started having proper lessons, and they said, why don't you do the instructor's course? So I thought, okay, so just for fun. So I did the instructor's course, and it was like, yeah, qualified. And it was like, oh, that was really cool. Apart from teaching at the lakes right next to where I live, I didn't really think of it going any further. But Orvis, I'm sure, American, great company, Orvis. They contacted me. They have shops they did a lot of shops, but they have their own beats on the River Test. And they contacted me and they said, we've heard you've qualified. We could really do with a woman, female, teaching and helping us, guiding.
Wow.
So I started helping, and it was just occasional. It kind of worked in with my kids and my husband being a farmer and busy during harvest. So I just did bits and pieces. And then it was like a snowball rolling down a hill. It just,
no kidding.
I just got busier and busier. And then my husband shoots as well on the farm, and all the farmers and the estate, they all know each other. It's a small island, England. And where we live, Hampshire, it's a small area. So I just get to meet people, and they'd say, oh, why don't you come down and teach on my bit of the water, or why don't you come and see these people? And it just kind of got crazy, and which was fantastic. And it was suddenly like, God, I've got a kind of job. And I was doing lots of guiding, lots of teaching. And then I met a guy who had a fly fishing trap, because the fishing community here is quite small. Everybody knows everybody. I was going to the game fairs and meeting other instructors, and we're all kind of hanging out and fishing and doing distance and messing around with fly rods at all these different events. I met this guy, and he had a travel company, an overseas travel company, and they just him and his wife became great friends, and they come and stay. And whenever we'd had too much to drink in the evening, we'd always say, oh, we should work together. We should work together. Yeah. Anyway, so we kind of joined forces, and he had fishermen who were coming from America, from overseas, who wanted to fish on the chalk streams. And my chalk stream fishermen wanted to go overseas to fish. because saltwater was really, really taking off. And it just became a gradual thing. So what we did is we set up his company is an overseas company, and I've got no part of it. But I have got a UK company, which is now my company, but we have the same name, although mine is the UK, Fly Odyssey UK. And it just kind of worked, really. And then about 5 years ago, I suddenly wanted to kind of raise my game, and not because I felt any pressure from any fishing guides or instructors in the UK, but just because I wanted to I wanted to get better at what I was doing. I go along to some shows and I'd see, and I'm sure you've seen them, you see some guys cast and you think, like, my God, like Rajesh or something, it's like, wow, like, my God, how do you, I was reading his, but all this kind of stuff. I was thinking, I want to be, that's where I want to be. How do I get that? So I then I went down, we have in the UK, we have what we call AAP guy, which is advanced casting. And I did the professional exam, and luckily I flew that one. That was fine. I thought, yay, I'm good at this. And then I'll take the advanced. And it was so tough. I mean, it was like training to be an athlete,
no kidding,
every single day for 2 years. I failed at the first time, failed at the second time. It was tough. It was difficult because I was the first woman. They've only got 2 others of qualified women in the country, and I was the third one to take the exam. And I think they couldn't, they had to be seen to be doing it properly with me. They couldn't just go, well, there you go, Gilly. I had to say, and I wasn't good enough. I clearly wasn't good enough. But eventually, I got it, and not that anybody I didn't need it. My clients, if you say to one of my clients, I'm a casting instructor, they have no idea what I've done. You're just a casting instructor.
It's an accomplishment, sure.
But for me, I wanted to be better, and I wanted to be quicker at identifying faults, and I wanted to teach advanced casting and understand where people were going wrong quickly, and just have a much better understanding of the rods, the reels, the lines. Because that's what makes you better. So I did it, and that was, I think, 5 years ago, and I'm really, really glad I did that, just for myself. And I hope, I like to say it's made me, I think, a better instructor for it, because my understanding is just greater now.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. It's great fun. I love teaching beginners and introducing people, but it's really cool. I had a guy a couple of weeks ago, really good caster. And I was really pleased that we did 2 hours just tightening up stuff he was doing. And it was tiny, tiny incremental changes that can make a big, big difference.
I'll be right over. I need that. That sounds awesome.
I'm sure you don't. So that was kind of how it happened. And then, so then I started, so with the company and stuff, I started, because obviously I couldn't be everywhere. So there's a lot of lovely guides out there down in this area, a lot of guys, some of them are qualified. Not everybody's qualified, but, people that understand how to catch fish, you've got the right personality, you know how to look after people. So I've got a nice little team. I've got about 6 guys that I regularly call on, particularly in the Mayfly period. And, they work for other guys as well, because that's just how it works. A lot of them cross over, but I've got some regulars, and it's, when I can't do stuff, they go out, and it works really. It's really nice. I've got all the gear for up to 12 people, and it's
fantastic.
Small, but it's great fun, and I love it.
I can tell, Gilly. Oh my gosh! Well, you have been wonderful on this show. I've just loved listening to you talking about the chalk streams and your life over there. It's been actually wonderful. I always ask my guests at the end of the show, do you guys do shore lunches, and what do you fix people? We call it shore lunch. It's lunch, basically. What's a great shore lunch for you?
Okay, so they can bring in their own sandwiches. We can get a little mini hamper with sandwiches and crisps and a beer in. But I have a caterer who comes and does. You just wouldn't believe the food she does. It's outrageous. She'll do scallops, she'll do fresh crab.
Ooh.
On a barbecue with pesto. She'll do ribeye steaks.
Oh my goodness!
And they have champagne.
Really?
Not everybody. Some people just have a flask of tea.
Okay. Oh my gosh. That's okay. Then one other question I always ask my guests: favorite place at the end of the day that anglers can go for a bite to eat at the end of the day?
Oh, it doesn't really work like that here because
It
most
doesn't?
people go home.
Oh.
No, not really. I think what if we get a group of guys and they will, and also drink driving here is so strict. So, but some of them will, an English pub, and we have a lovely little market town called Stockbridge, which everybody goes to fishing on the Test, and we've got some fantastic hotels and proper English pubs. So they'll go there and they can have anything from a pie to, fantastic sort of London type food. So they will often, but a lot of guys will just go for, a beer, and we've got lots of pubs around, depending on where you were. We've got lots of British pubs, so that's what they tend to do.
Sounds pretty good. Gilly, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. It's so lovely of you to have contacted me, and so nice to be in touch with people from the other side of the world. It's quite extraordinary, really. It's a small world, fishing, isn't it?
It sure
Me
is.
too.
Absolutely. And if you ever come through Indiana, give me a shout. I'd love to have you over and hear more.
Well, and you come fish with me, Steve. I'll take you out, and
That'd be great.
Come and fish on the Test. That would be so cool.
It's on my bucket list.
Thank you very much for asking me. Great.
Yeah,
honor.
absolutely. You are very welcome. How can people get in touch with you if they want to talk about fishing on the Test?
Well, Instagram, direct message me on Instagram, and if my Instagram is just Gilly, GILLYBATE. So they can direct message me on Instagram or Facebook. And Facebook, it's Gilly Bate Fly Odyssey, or email me on g.bate, BATE, at Fly Odyssey, FLYODYSSEY.co.uk.
There we go. There you go, folks. Reach out if you've got some questions for Gilly. She'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, dude. I'd love to.
Yep. Gilly, I wish you extraordinary success on all your adventures to follow. And folks, thank you so much for listening. Gilly sent me a bunch of really great photos already. I can't wait to post those on our Instagram and Facebook pages for everybody to take a look at. You can email me or DM me with comments and suggestions at shag50@gmail.com. And if you like the show, please share it with a buddy. As always, our music is by A Brothers Fountain. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again soon. Tight lines, everybody.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.